She didn't come to that restaurant looking for a husband. He didn't come looking for anything except the right address. But the moment Logan Hayes sat down across from Victoria Sinclair, a woman worth more than the GDP of a small country, neither of them knew their lives were about to be permanently broken open. What happens when a billionaire heir and a man who fixes things with his hands end up sharing a table, a conversation, and a silence so honest it makes the walls come down? This is not a story about money. It's about what happens when two people accidentally find something real, and how terrifying that can be. Before we get into this story, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. Stories like this one, where ordinary lives collide with extraordinary choices, are what this channel is built for. Drop a like if you want more, and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I read every single one. Now, let's get into it. The restaurant was the kind of place where the lighting cost more to install than Logan Hayes made in a year. He figured that out the second he pushed through the heavy glass door and felt the air change. Cooler, quieter, like stepping into a museum that served food. The floor was dark marble. The ceiling had actual recessed panels with tiny warm bulbs arranged in patterns someone had clearly spent a long time thinking about. Every table had a candle in a low glass holder, and not one of those candles was dripping wrong. Logan stood just inside the entrance with a folded piece of paper in his hand and the immediate certainty that he had made a mistake. He pulled out his phone and checked the address again. 47 East 53rd. He looked up at the gold lettering above the host stand. Renard. Then he checked his text thread with the building super who'd sent him here about a leaking pipe in the private dining suite. The address matched. The vibe did not. Sir? The host was already moving toward him with the practiced smile of someone trained to be welcoming to everyone while subtly making certain people feel unwelcome. He was young, maybe 24, with slicked back hair and a jacket that probably cost $400. He glanced at Logan's clothes. The worn Carhartt jacket, the scuffed work boots, the paint along the inner edge of his left wrist that hadn't come off in the shower, and the smile adjusted slightly, tightening at the corners. I'm looking for the service entrance, Logan said. I've got a repair call. Of course, the host nodded. That would be around the side on 54th, past the loading dock. Right. Logan folded his paper and tucked it back into his jacket pocket. Sorry about that. He turned to leave. That was it. That should have been the entire story. A guy who made a wrong turn, got redirected, went around the side of the building and fixed a pipe for $240. Drove home to Queens, warmed up leftover soup, kissed his daughter goodnight. Instead, his phone rang. He stepped to the side of the entrance to answer it, out of the way of a couple coming in behind him, and the call connected before he had a chance to think about where he was standing. Daddy. Emma's voice came through small and immediate. 6 years old, and she somehow always managed to make his name sound like both a greeting and a complete sentence. Hey, Bug. He moved further to the side, closer to the wall. You're supposed to be in bed. Mrs. Delgado said 15 more minutes. Mrs. Delgado is very generous with other people's rules. She let me have crackers, too. Of course she did. He could hear the television in the background. Some cartoon with a familiar jingling theme. You brushed your teeth already. Before the crackers. Emma. They were just plain crackers. They don't have sugar. He rubbed his face with one hand and felt the tension in his shoulders soften the way it always did when she talked. It was involuntary, like exhaling. Brush them again when you're done, okay? Deal? Deal. A pause. When are you coming home? Couple hours. Depends on the job. What's wrong with the pipe? Don't know yet. Might be a compression issue. Might be something with the valve seat. Oh. Another pause, this one more thoughtful. Daddy, which is worse? The valve seat. Is it the valve seat? I don't know yet, Bug. Okay. She accepted this with the equanimity of someone who had learned that some things just required waiting. 6 years old and already better at patience than most adults he knew. I love you. I love you too, he said. More than everything. More than your truck? Way more than my truck. More than pizza? Emma, go to bed. She laughed. That sound, the specific shape of it, the way it cut right through whatever else was happening in his chest. And the call ended. Logan stood holding the phone for a second, looking at the dark screen. Then he became aware that someone was watching him. She was seated at a table along the near wall, half turned in her chair, a glass of water untouched in front of her. 30-ish, dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless and probably wasn't. She was wearing a dark dress that was clearly expensive without announcing it, and she had the posture of someone who'd been trained from childhood to sit like that. Straight, composed, but not rigid, like a person who had learned to perform calm so thoroughly that sometimes she probably forgot it was a performance. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read, not the politely indifferent look he'd gotten from the host, something more direct. Curious, maybe. A little guarded. The host reappeared at Logan's elbow. "Sir, if you need to take that call, I'm done," Logan said. The host nodded crisply, then glanced toward the woman at the table, and something shifted in his face. Recognition, deference, a subtle reset. He turned back to Logan. "Actually, are you Mr.?" He glanced down at a small leather portfolio. "Mr. Hargrove." Logan opened his mouth. He didn't know why he didn't immediately say no. Later, he would try to explain this to himself, and the best he came up with was that his brain was still half in the phone call, half thinking about compression fittings, and the host had moved so quickly and confidently that the question landed like a statement before Logan had time to process it. Your table is ready." The host gestured toward the woman. "Miss Sinclair has been waiting." And then Logan was walking toward the table. He wasn't sure how. His feet were moving, and the host was stepping back, and the woman, Ms. Sinclair, was looking at him with that expression still on her face, and he reached the table and stopped. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. He pulled out the chair and sat down, because standing in the middle of this restaurant holding a piece of paper with a plumber's address on it was somehow worse than sitting. "I'm going to be up front with you," he said. "I think there's been some confusion. I'm not who they think I am." She studied him. Up close, she had dark eyes that moved over his face with the kind of focus that most people reserved for contracts or spreadsheets. "I know," she said. Logan blinked. "You know? I watched you walk in. You were looking for the service entrance." She reached for her water glass, took a small sip. "Philip," she tilted her head toward the host, "saw you standing there and assumed. He does that sometimes. Makes things easier than asking." "I can go explain to him." "Do you want to?" He stopped. She was watching him with something that might have been the beginning of amusement, very contained. "The man I was supposed to meet tonight," she said, "is a 41-year-old partner at a private equity firm in Midtown, whose hobby, according to his profile, is competitive sailing. His name is actually Hargrove. We've never met. Someone else arranged this dinner." She set her glass down precisely. "You don't look like a Hargrove." "I'm a Hayes," he said. "And what does a Hayes do?" "Fix things, pipes mostly. Some electrical." He paused. "Tonight was supposed to be a leaking pipe in the kitchen downstairs." She tilted her head slightly. "How unfortunate for the pipe." He almost smiled. Didn't quite. "I should go." "You probably should," she agreed. But she didn't move, and somehow that settled it. He didn't move either. The waiter appeared and placed menus in front of both of them with the fluent professionalism of someone who had been trained never to register surprise. They sat with the menus for a moment. Logan opened his and looked at the prices and closed it again. "You don't need to order," she said. "I won't be offended." "It's not that." He set the menu at the edge of the table. "I've eaten. I worked through lunch so I could pick up Emma, my daughter, from school at 3, and I grabbed something then." He was oversharing. He knew that. Something about the way she was looking at him made him want to fill the silence with actual truth rather than the usual polite fog. "I could use a coffee, though." "Coffee it is." She closed her own menu. "I hate this restaurant for what it's worth. Renard is what happens when money becomes its own justification. Everything here is technically excellent and entirely soulless. She said it the way someone says something they've been thinking for a while but haven't said out loud. I was told it was a neutral location, appropriate for a first meeting. A neutral location? Logan repeated. She didn't elaborate immediately. The waiter returned. Logan ordered coffee, black. Victoria ordered a glass of red wine and the duckling, with the manner of someone ordering a sandwich. No performance in it. That phone call, she said when the waiter left. The little girl. Emma, she's 6. He felt the instinct to be protective of it, to give the shortened version, the surface version, but something stopped him. Her mother died 4 years ago. Aneurysm. No warning. He said it the way you learn to say things that are true and terrible, cleanly, without the pause in the middle that makes other people feel they need to respond. It's just the two of us. She was quiet for a moment, not with discomfort, more like she was actually absorbing it. She sounds happy, she said. The crackers, the deal about the teeth. She gets away with things because I can't see her face on the phone and she knows it. He turned his coffee cup when it arrived, a small habit. She's smarter than I deserve. Most children are. He looked at her. You sound like you know. I don't have children. Something moved through her expression, brief and controlled. But I had a childhood. It was a strange way to say it, like childhood was a territory she'd moved through and put behind her rather than a time she carried with her. Was it bad? He asked. She seemed slightly surprised he'd asked directly. Most people, he imagined, would have let it go or changed the subject. It was very structured, she said, very deliberate. I was prepared for a specific life. She lifted her wine. What about you? Queens, 3 brothers. My father did HVAC work. My uncle did plumbing. I did both for a while and then just settled on pipes because my father thought HVAC was the better career, and I've always had a problem with people telling me what the better career is. Her mouth moved. Definitely the beginning of something. Spite as career counseling. Works better than people think. And now you fix pipes at a restaurant on 53rd Street. I fix pipes everywhere. I did a hotel last week, elementary school the week before that. Tonight was supposed to be a kitchen valve, but instead He gestured vaguely at the table. Having coffee across from a stranger who won't tell you why she's at this table either. Yeah, he said. That. She told him eventually. Not all of it, not then, but enough. Victoria Sinclair. Her family's name was on 3 buildings in Midtown and a wing of a hospital she'd never actually visited. Her grandfather had built the investment firm from regional banking into something that now managed assets across 6 countries. She had run it for 4 years after her father stepped back, and she was good at it. She said this without false modesty or particular pride. The way you might say I'm good at driving. But the board had conditions about the succession of leadership, and one of those conditions, buried in the articles of governance her grandfather had written in the 1980s, had recently become relevant. The dinner tonight, Logan said, is one of several. She turned her wine glass. They've been vetted. Men from appropriate backgrounds, appropriate connections, someone who can represent the company's interests. The term used in the document is socially consonant. Socially consonant, he said. I know. That's... He stopped himself from saying what he was going to say, which was insane. You can say it. I was trying to be polite. Don't. She looked at him steadily. I've had enough polite to last me a lifetime. Say what you mean. He looked at her for a moment. This woman in the expensive dress who hated this restaurant and said, I had a childhood like she was talking about a tour of duty. I think it's a miserable way to live, he said, being arranged around. Yes. Very quiet. It is. So why are you still doing it? Because the alternative... She stopped, set her glass down. The alternative has costs. Everything has cost. These particular costs are significant. She said it with the flat precision of someone doing math in their head. 42% of the company's voting shares are contingent on the succession clause. If I don't meet the terms, control transfers to the board committee. To my uncle. A beat. He would not be a good steward. Of what? Of the company. Of the people who depend on it. Of... She stopped herself again, like she was catching herself caring about something she'd decided not to care about in public. Logan drank his coffee. It was objectively excellent coffee, dark and clean with no bitterness. "How long do you have?" he asked. She looked at him with a different kind of attention. "To meet the clause?" "Yeah. 6 weeks." He nodded slowly. He had the feeling, sitting there, that the conversation was moving somewhere, that there was weight building up behind what she was saying, the way pressure builds in a pipe with a blockage. But he couldn't see yet where it would go. "Emma asked," he said after a moment. "In the call, she asked which is worse, the compression issue or the valve seat." He wasn't sure why he was saying this, except that the restaurant had gone quieter around them in the way restaurants do when the dinner rush slows, and the candlelight had made the table feel smaller. "I told her I didn't know yet. She said, okay, and waited. 6 years old." He set his cup down. "I've been thinking about what she'd say about all of this." What would she say? He thought about it honestly. She'd ask why you're doing something that makes you unhappy, and she'd mean it as an actual question, not a criticism. Victoria looked at him for a long time. The expression on her face was strange, but not sad exactly, but like something was happening underneath the surface of it. Some shift he couldn't name. "She sounds like someone worth listening to," Victoria said finally. "She's the only one I always do." The waiter cleared their cups and glasses and came back with the check, which Victoria took without looking at it and slid a card in without glancing at the number. The ease of it was striking. Not showy, just completely automatic, the way wealthy people do things that would make other people nervous. "I'll walk you out," she said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She stood, and there it was again. That posture, that composure, but something around the edges of it that was less controlled than it had been an hour ago. Like a seam had loosened slightly. "I want to." They walked out through the quiet restaurant, past the host who gave Logan a second look he probably thought wasn't obvious. Outside, the city was doing what New York does in the evening, pouring itself in all directions at once. Taxis and delivery bikes and couples and people on their phones, all of it loud and indifferent and alive. Logan turned up his collar. The air had dropped 10 degrees since he'd gone in. "Hayes," Victoria said. He looked at her. She was standing on the sidewalk with her hands at her sides, and she had an expression that was, for the first time all night, something he couldn't even start to decode. Not the careful poise from dinner. Something more unguarded. Something that looked like the beginning of a decision she hadn't fully made yet. "I'm going to be thinking about what you said," she said, "about being arranged around." "Okay." "And about Emma." She'd probably find that weird. "Probably." Almost a smile. Not quite. "Good luck with the pipe." "Good luck with..." He stopped because there was no graceful way to finish that sentence. She nodded once, like she understood anyway, and turned and walked back through the glass doors of a restaurant she hated, back into the life she'd built her whole self around protecting. Logan stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the city moving around him, his jacket not quite warm enough, thinking about compression issues and valve seats, and the way a 6-year-old's laughter could locate something in your chest you'd forgotten was there. He went around to 54th Street, found the service entrance, fixed the pipe. It was the valve seat. He drove home to Queens. He reheated the soup. He kissed Emma on the forehead in the dark, and she stirred just enough to say hi, Daddy, and went back under. He sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes before he went to bed, drinking water, not thinking about anything specific. That was what he told himself, anyway. 3 days passed before Logan heard from her again. He'd half convinced himself the whole thing would stay what it was. A strange Tuesday evening, a cup of good coffee, a conversation that didn't go where either of them expected, the kind of thing that happens in a city like New York and then dissolves into the general noise of living. He fixed a water heater in the Bronx on Wednesday, replaced a section of galvanized pipe in a brownstone in Park Slope on Thursday, picked Emma up from school both days, made dinner, helped her with the worksheet about animal habitats that she insisted was too easy, but still asked him to sit next to her while she did it. He did not think about Victoria Sinclair. He thought about her a moderate amount, which he told himself was the same thing. Friday morning he was on a job in Midtown, A commercial building on 49th, third-floor bathroom with a slow drain that turned out to be a collapsed section of cast iron stack. He was 40 minutes into the diagnosis when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. Manhattan area code. He almost let it go to voicemail. He didn't know why he answered. Hayes? A beat. It's Victoria Sinclair. He crouched down next to the access panel and said nothing for a second. How did you get this number? Your business card is listed with the building management company that contracts your work. It wasn't difficult. She said it without apology, which he found he didn't actually mind. At least she wasn't pretending she'd run into him by accident. I'd like to meet with you. Not at a restaurant. Somewhere more practical. More practical than, I have a proposal. Her voice was controlled, the way it had been that first night, but there was something underneath it. A very small vibration that he recognized as the sound of someone who had been awake thinking about what they were going to say. A formal one. I'd prefer to explain it in person. Logan looked at the collapsed section of pipe in front of him. Black cast iron, cracked along the collar joint, going to need a full section replacement, at least 6 feet. This job had just gotten longer and more expensive for whoever owned this building. He thought about that for no real reason. The way things that look like one problem turn out to be another problem underneath. I'm in Midtown until 3, he said. After that, I pick up Emma. 4 o'clock, there's a coffee shop on 48th and Lex, corner unit. Nothing impressive, just quiet. A pause. I'll be there at 4. She hung up before he could decide if he was agreeing. He was there at 5 to 4. She arrived at exactly 4, which told him something about her. Not that she was on time. Anyone can be on time. The exactness of it, the zero margin of it, said something about how she moved through the world. Like deviation was a habit she'd trained herself out of. She came in wearing a dark coat, no umbrella even though it had been threatening rain all afternoon, her hair down today instead of pulled back. She looked, if anything, more tired than she had on Tuesday. Not unkempt. She was too composed for that. But there were shadows under her eyes that no amount of careful living was covering. She ordered tea at the counter. He had coffee already. She sat down across from him and put both hands around her cup and looked at him with the directness that he was starting to recognize as just the way she was. No warm-up, no small talk, just the level gaze of someone who had decided to say the difficult thing and was going to say it. I'll get to it, she said. Please. I need a husband. She said it flat and clean, the way you'd say, I need a plumber or I need a car. For 2 years. Contractually. Someone who can satisfy the succession clause in my company's governance structure and hold the position with enough credibility that the board can't challenge it. She looked at him steadily. I'd like that person to be you. The coffee shop was doing moderate mid-afternoon business. Somebody's laptop was playing music at a nearby table, something low and acoustic. The espresso machine fired up behind the counter. Logan sat with his coffee and looked at Victoria Sinclair and thought about 6 or 7 different things simultaneously, none of which were the right response. You don't know me, he said finally. I know enough. You know that my daughter negotiates bedtime with my babysitter and that I fix pipes for a living. I know that you walked into a restaurant in work boots and sat down at the wrong table and spent 40 minutes talking to a stranger and at no point tried to perform being something you're not. She turned her cup. That's rarer than you'd think, in my experience. Victoria, $50 million. She said it without inflection, like it was a measurement, not a number meant to stun. For 2 years of your time. You would maintain your life as normally as possible, so your work, your home, your routines with Emma. There would be appearances, events, situations where your presence is required. We would have to be believable in the right rooms to the right people. She paused. At the end of 2 years, the clause is satisfied, control of the company is secured, and you walk away with $50 million and no further obligations. Logan set his coffee down. $50 million. He let the number sit in front of him like an object. He looked at it. He knew what $50 million meant, or tried to know, because the truth was the number was too large to mean anything concrete. What it translated to was Emma's college, her graduate school if she wanted it, a house without a landlord, no more weeks where a slow month on jobs meant choosing between the water bill and the electric. It meant his back, which had been giving him trouble since a fall on a job site 2 years ago, could get the surgery the orthopedic specialist had recommended, and he'd been quietly not scheduling. It meant he could stop doing the math every Sunday night when he sat down with the bills and the week's receipts. He knew what it meant. He also knew what Victoria Sinclair was asking him. "Emma's 6, he said. "I know. She's at an age where she—" He stopped. Started again. "Her mother died when she was 2. She doesn't have memories of it, not real ones, but she has the shape of it. She knows something's missing, and she's old enough now to be figuring out what family means, what it's supposed to look like." He looked directly at Victoria. "What you're describing would put her inside something that isn't real and ask her to live there for 2 years. She wouldn't know it wasn't real. She'd be 6, then 7, then 8. He shook his head slowly. "That's not 2 years of appearances and events. That's 2 years of her believing something that isn't true." Victoria said nothing. "Her mother was—" He exhaled. Claire was honest. About everything. Sometimes in ways that made life more complicated. She believed that kids deserved real answers, even when real answers are hard. It was the thing I admired most about her, and the thing that drove me crazy, in equal measure. He looked down at the table. "I promised her that Emma would grow up knowing the truth about things, that we wouldn't soften the world for her in ways that would set her up to be blindsided by it later." He looked back up. "What you're describing would break that." The music from the next table ended, and there was a brief silence in the coffee shop, just the general hum of the city coming through the glass front. "I understand," Victoria said. Her voice was careful. Not cold. Careful. Like she was holding something fragile. "I'm not asking you to deceive Emma. The structure of the arrangement, the structure of it doesn't matter. She's 6 years old. She doesn't understand contractual arrangements. She understands whether the people around her are real or not. Kids know that. They're better at it than adults." He pushed his cup to the side. "I'm not saying no to the money. I understand what 50 million means. I understand that you're in a situation you didn't fully choose and that the stakes for you are real." He met her eyes. "I'm saying that making this decision without thinking about what it does to Emma isn't something I can do. I promised her mother I wouldn't do that." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. There was something complicated moving behind her eyes. He could see it even though she was working to keep her face still. Something between frustration and something else he couldn't name. "Most people," she said slowly, "would have said yes in the first 30 seconds. I know. The number. I heard the number." He wasn't harsh about it. "I heard it fine." She sat back. She looked out through the front window of the coffee shop at the street. The taxis, the people in coats moving fast, the gray afternoon sky pressing down on the buildings. She had the look of someone recalculating, but underneath that, something else. Something that looked like she hadn't been prepared for this specific response and didn't entirely know what to do with it. "What would you need?" she asked. "To even consider it?" "Time." He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "I need to think. And I need to think about Emma, not about the money." He stood up. "Don't take that as a negotiation tactic. It's not." "I know it's not." She said it quietly. "That's why I came to you." He buttoned his jacket. "How much time do you have?" "On the clause." 5.5 weeks now." He nodded. "I'll call you." "Logan." She said his name for the first time, and it stopped him. He looked back at her. She was still sitting with both hands around her tea, very still, very composed, but her jaw was set in a way that suggested the composure was doing real work. "I want you to know I am aware of what I'm asking. I don't think it's a small thing." A pause. "I don't usually admit that. About anything." "I know," he said. He walked out into the gray afternoon and pulled his collar up and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the city folding around him the way it always did. Indifferent and relentless and alive. He thought about $50 million. He thought about Emma asleep in the dark, her hand curled near her face, her breath slow and even and completely trusting. He thought about a pipe in a wall that looks fine from the outside and is rotting from the inside, and how you never know until you open it up. He walked to the subway and took the 6 train back toward Queens. That night, after Emma was in bed, He sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen and tried to write down the arguments, for and against, the way he'd done when Claire was sick and the decisions were coming too fast to hold in his head. He'd learned that from her, actually. Write it down, she used to say, so it's outside your head and you can see it. The for column. Emma's entire future, financially secured. His own body, repaired. No more Sunday night math. 2 years of discomfort in exchange for permanent stability for his daughter. The against column. He wrote Claire and put the pen down. He sat there for a while. The refrigerator made its low hum. A bus went by outside. He could hear, faintly, Emma shifting in her sleep in the next room. The thing was, and this was the thing he kept coming back to, the thing he couldn't reason his way around, the promise he'd made to Claire hadn't been a formal thing. There was no document. Claire was lying in a hospital bed in those last hours that none of the doctors had prepared them for because nobody had seen it coming, and she had looked at him with that particular look she had, the one that was completely clear-eyed and a little impatient, the one that meant stop dancing around the thing and say the thing, and she had said, don't protect her from real life. Let her be in the real one. And he had said he would, and she had nodded and closed her eyes. That was it. That was the whole promise. No ceremony, no witnesses, no paper. He picked the pen back up. In the against column, under Claire, he wrote, she'd know something was off. Kids always know. Then, after a moment, he wrote one more thing. I'd know. He tore the page off the pad and folded it and put it in the junk drawer with the dead batteries and the rubber bands and the takeout menus nobody ever looked at. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to the city outside and thought about 5.5 weeks, and a woman sitting in a coffee shop with her hands around a cup of tea, looking out at the street like she was trying to see something that wasn't there yet. He didn't sleep well. In the morning, Emma wanted pancakes, and he made them from scratch, the way his mother had taught him, with a little too much butter in the pan so the edges went crispy. Emma ate 4 of them, which was basically her body weight, and talked the entire time about a girl in her class named Priya who had a hamster and whether she, Emma Hayes, could also have a hamster. We talked about pets, Logan said. That was about a dog. A hamster is different. How is it different? It's smaller. Emma. Priya's hamster is named Biscuit. She said it like this was highly relevant information. That's a good name for a hamster. See? She pointed at him with her fork. You like it. I like the name. That doesn't mean we're getting a hamster. She considered this with the seriousness of a litigator. What if I named it something you didn't like? Would that make it worse? That's not the variable here. What's a variable? The thing that changes. She thought about it. I'm the variable, she said. He looked at her over his coffee. 6 years old. Smarter than he deserved. Same as always. Yeah, he said. You're the variable. She went back to her pancakes, satisfied. He watched her eat and thought about the legal pad in the junk drawer and the promise in the hospital room and $50 million and a woman with dark eyes who had said, I know it's not with a quietness that had stayed with him more than he wanted to admit. He called Victoria that afternoon. She answered on the second ring, which told him she'd been waiting for it. Hayes? I'm not signing anything, he said. Not yet. Probably not at all. I need you to understand that's still where I am. I understand. But I want to know more about what you're actually facing, the specifics, not the proposal, the actual job, the actual situation. Because right now I'm making a decision based on what you told me in 10 minutes in a coffee shop, and that's not enough. A pause. What do you want to know? Everything you didn't tell me. There was a silence on the line, longer than he expected. Not hesitation exactly. More like she was adjusting to the reality that this was a different kind of conversation than the one she normally had. That's going to take more than a phone call, she said. I know. When? Not this week. I have work through Friday, and Emma has a thing at school Thursday evening I'm not missing. He checked the calendar on the wall next to the fridge, the paper one with the cartoon dogs that Emma had picked out. Sunday, afternoon, somewhere that isn't a restaurant and isn't a boardroom. There's a park on the east side, Carl Schurz. There are benches along the water. Fine. He pulled the pen off the counter and wrote it on the paper calendar, then looked at what he'd written for a second before he said anything else. Victoria. Yes. I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear just because the clock is running. If you're expecting me to come around to yes because the weeks are running out, I need you to drop that expectation now. What I'm doing is trying to understand the situation clearly enough to make a real decision. That's all. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had something in it that wasn't quite surprise, but was adjacent to it. I don't know many people who talk to me like that. Like what? Like what you say is the actual thing you mean. He didn't have an answer to that, so he didn't offer one. Sunday, he said. 2:00. 2:00, she confirmed. He hung up and stood in the kitchen with the phone in his hand and the paper calendar on the wall in front of him. Emma's cartoon dogs grinning from the top of the page, his own handwriting in the Sunday square, Carl Schurz, 2 p.m. He stood there for a moment, then put the phone in his pocket and went back to the pipe diagram he'd been sketching for Monday's job. Sunday came with cold, clear light and the kind of November air that smells like iron and distant water. He told Emma he was meeting someone about a work thing, which was close enough to true that it didn't feel like a lie, and Mrs. Delgado was taking her to a craft fair in Astoria for the afternoon. He found Victoria already at the bench when he arrived, 2 minutes before 2. She was in a long dark coat again, a thermos in one hand, looking at the river. The East River gray and slow below them, Roosevelt Island across the water, a barge moving south with the current. She heard him coming and turned, and there it was again. That look. Direct, guarded, but with something underneath it that was neither of those things. Thanks for coming, she said. You said there was a thermos. I'm here for the thermos. It's tea. I didn't think to bring two. I had coffee on the way. He sat down at the far end of the bench, leaving a gap between them that felt right. Professional distance, clear heads. Tell me about your uncle. She sat down too, looked at the river, and she told him. His name was Richard Sinclair. 63 years old, her father's younger brother, had been on the company's board since before Victoria was born. She described him with the flatness of someone who had long ago moved past the stage of anger into something harder and more durable. Richard had never run anything significant in the company, but had spent 30 years positioning himself inside it, building alliances, collecting leverage. He had the succession clause on his side, and he had the patience of a man who had been waiting a very long time. If Victoria failed to meet the terms, the voting restructuring would give his committee block enough combined influence to install a proxy CEO within 90 days. What would he do with it? Logan asked. Sell it. Not all at once. He'd dismantle the asset base over 3 to 4 years, extract maximum value from the individual holdings, and distribute to the major shareholders. She said it without particular heat, which sounds like normal business practice until you look at what's inside the asset base. There are 4 healthcare management companies in the portfolio that provide administrative services to community hospitals in 6 states. There's an affordable housing development fund that's been running on a below-market return structure for 11 years. There's a logistics company in the Midwest with 800 employees. Those don't survive a liquidation strategy. They get sold to whoever offers the best price, restructured or shuttered, and the people inside them absorb the consequences. Logan looked at the barge on the river. That's the part you didn't say in the coffee shop. I don't usually. She stopped. I usually keep the argument at the level of corporate governance. It's cleaner. People respond to power dynamics more predictably than they respond to employees in Ohio. But those are the actual stakes. Those are the actual stakes. He was quiet for a moment. A jogger went past on the path behind them, earbuds in, not looking at them. A gull went over the river, banking on a current. And your father, he said, you said he stepped back. 3 years ago, his health. She turned the thermos in her hands. He's not involved in the governance decisions. He trusts Richard more than he trusts me, which is a pause. It's a long history. I'm not going to summarize it on a park bench. Fair enough. My mother's been gone a long time. She said it the same way he had when he told her about Claire. Clean and flat, no pause in the middle. I grew up mostly in the company, learning it, being shaped for it. She looked at the river. It's the only thing I'm actually good at. I don't think that's true. She glanced at him. The restaurant, he said. I don't know what you were doing there, but you were paying attention to things. The host, the room, what I was saying. You were present in a way a lot of people aren't. That's not a company skill. She looked at him with that expression that kept appearing on her face, the one that said she'd received something unexpected and hadn't decided yet what to do with it. 50 million is my limit, she said eventually, like they needed to get back to the business of it. The company can sustain the payout. It won't be comfortable, but it won't be destructive. And I need the commitment within 3 weeks to have time to file the documentation and prepare for the board review. I know. I'm not trying to pressure you with the timeline. Yes, you are, he said, not unkindly. A little. The timeline is real and we both know it, and it creates pressure. That's just what it does. He looked at her. I'm not going to let the timeline make the decision for me. She held his gaze. What will make the decision for you? I don't know yet. He stood up, pushed his hands into his jacket pockets. I need to think about Emma. That's the honest answer. He looked out at the river one more time. She's who I answer to. Victoria was quiet. She was looking up at him from the bench, the pale November light on her face, and she had an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the controlled composure, not the careful calculation, something rawer than that. Something that looked, if he was reading it right, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected to find in this conversation, on this bench, with this person. You really meant that, she said, when you said it. About Emma? About who you answer to. She turned the thermos in her hands again. Most people say things like that. They don't mean them the way you mean them. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said, I'll call you by end of next week. He walked back along the path by the water, hands in his pockets, the wind off the river cold against the side of his face. Behind him he could hear, or maybe imagined he could hear, the soft sound of someone sitting very still on a bench and thinking very hard about something they hadn't expected to be thinking about. He got to the subway and went down the stairs and waited for the train and thought about the 800 employees in Ohio. He thought about Emma at a craft fair in Astoria, probably talking someone into letting her make more projects than she was supposed to. He thought about a woman with a thermos she hadn't thought to bring two of, sitting by a gray river alone. The train came. He got on. He rode home through the tunnel under the East River, under all that cold, dark water, and when he came up on the Queen's side into the afternoon light, he still hadn't made a decision, and he knew, in the way you know certain things before you're ready to say them out loud, that when he made it, it was going to cost him something, no matter which way it went. That was the thing about real decisions. They always did. He called her Thursday, 4 days after the bench at Carl Schurz. Not because the week had run out, not because the deadline was pressing in, though it was, quietly, the way a low-grade headache presses before it becomes something you have to deal with. He called because he'd been sitting on the edge of Emma's bed the night before, reading to her from the battered paperback of adventure stories they'd been working through for 3 weeks. And Emma had fallen asleep mid-chapter, the way she sometimes did. Suddenly, completely, like a switch thrown, and he'd sat there in the dim light with the book open in his lap looking at her face, the slight frown she kept even in sleep, the way her hand had curled around the edge of her blanket, and he had thought, I cannot make this decision without telling her something. Not the full truth, not the proposal with its dollar amount and its contractual architecture. She was 6. But something true. Something that let him look at her the next morning and not feel like he was already deceiving her before anything had even been decided. He'd figured out by Thursday morning what that something was. He called Victoria from the truck, parked outside a hardware store in Long Island City, engine running for the heat. I'm not signing, he said when she answered. I need you to hear that clearly before I say anything else. I'm not going to put Emma inside something artificial for 2 years, regardless of what it pays. That part isn't moving. A pause. I hear you, but I want you to meet her. The pause this time was different, longer. Logan, not as a strategy, not to change my mind. I want you to meet her because I've been sitting here thinking about what's fair, and I realize that I've been making a decision about Emma's life based on my own principles without giving Emma any part in it. She doesn't get a vote. She's 6. She can't vote on a business arrangement. But she gets to be a person in this. She gets to be real. He looked through the windshield at the gray street. A woman pushing a stroller past the hardware store. A pigeon doing pigeon things on the curb. And honestly, I want to see what happens when you meet her. Because the way I make big decisions... He stopped. Started again. Claire used to say I think with my gut and justify with my brain. She wasn't wrong. My gut needs more information. Victoria was quiet for long enough that he checked the screen to make sure the call was still connected. It was. You want me to meet your daughter, she said slowly, so your gut can tell you something. Yeah. That's... She seemed to be searching for a word and coming up empty. I don't know what that is. It's how I make decisions. Take it or leave it. Another pause. He could hear something in the background on her end, an office sound, quiet and ventilated. Then, when? Saturday. There's a park near our place in Sunnyside. She goes on the swings after lunch, usually around 1. If you show up, it won't be weird because she talks to everyone. She doesn't have a filter on strangers. He hesitated. Don't dress like you're going to a park in Manhattan. She'll think something is off. How do people dress when they go to a park and just wear something normal? A very brief silence. I'll be there. He almost said, You're sure, but stopped himself because she hadn't asked him if he was sure about anything, and he owed her the same respect. 1 o'clock, he said. It's called Doughboy Park. Small, by the tracks. You'll see us. He hung up and sat in the truck for another minute before going into the hardware store. He didn't tell Emma someone was coming. He decided against it partly because he didn't want her to perform, to put on whatever version of herself she thought a guest deserved. She had a tendency toward that, a kind of performative sweetness that came out around adults who seemed important, and he didn't want that. He wanted Emma, the real one. Crackers and hamster negotiations, and the finger pointed across the breakfast table. He also didn't tell her because he still didn't fully know what he was doing, and explaining it to a 6-year-old when he couldn't explain it to himself seemed like a bad approach. Saturday was cold but dry, which in November in New York counts as good weather. Emma wore her red coat with the hood she never put up no matter how cold it was, and her sneakers that lit up when she walked, which she'd insisted on despite Logan's gentle campaign toward the warmer boots. They walked to Doughboy Park after lunch, grilled cheese, tomato soup, the soup dispensed with a speed that suggested she'd been waiting for the swings the whole time, and Emma went immediately for the swings while Logan sat on the bench with his coffee thermos and watched. The park was small and unpretentious, a swing set, a slide, a climbing structure shaped vaguely like a ship that had seen better days. The elevated train tracks ran nearby, and every few minutes the ground would carry a faint vibration as a train went over. 3 other kids were on the playground, younger than Emma, with a father watching from another bench who gave Logan the nod that parents give each other in parks, the universal acknowledgement of shared exhaustion. Victoria arrived at 1:05. He saw her come through the park entrance, the low gate in the chain-link fence, and even in what she'd interpreted as normal clothes, which turned out to be dark jeans, a gray sweater under an unstructured wool coat, she looked like herself. He wasn't sure how to explain that exactly. It wasn't that she looked expensive. It was more that she moved through space in a particular way, with a particular quality of attention, and it was visible whether she was in a restaurant or a park by the train tracks in Queens. She saw him and came over. She sat down at the other end of the bench without ceremony, which he appreciated. She's on the swings, he said. Victoria looked. Emma was pumping hard, the red coat catching air, her sneakers flickering light each time her feet swung forward. Her hood was down. Her hair was doing what Emma's hair did when she hadn't let Logan brush it sufficiently, which was a lot. She's fast, Victoria said. She does everything fast. Except getting dressed in the morning. That takes 40 minutes. Victoria watched her swing. Her hands were in her coat pockets, and she had the look on her face of someone who is taking something in without knowing yet what to make of it. Not sentimental, just attentive. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The train went over the tracks nearby, that low vibration running through the bench and up through the soles of their feet, and then it was gone and the park was quiet again, just the sound of Emma's swing and the younger kids arguing over the slide. Then Emma stopped pumping and let the swing slow, and she looked over at the bench, and she saw Victoria. Emma had, as Logan had mentioned, no filter on strangers. She slid off the swing before it had fully stopped, which was a habit Logan had not managed to break, landed in the wood chips, and walked over with the directness of someone who had decided something was interesting and intended to investigate. She stopped in front of the bench. She looked at Victoria with the particular unguarded assessment of a child who hasn't yet learned to pretend she isn't looking. Victoria, to her credit, looked back with the same directness and did not do any of the things some adults did when confronted with small children. The high voice, the exaggerated expression, the performance of delight. "Hi," Emma said. "Hi," Victoria said. "I'm Emma." "I know. I'm Victoria." Emma considered this. "That's a long name." "It is. Mine's short." "Also true." Emma glanced at Logan with an expression that said, "She's weird but interesting." Then she looked back at Victoria. "Do you know my dad from work?" "Sort of," Victoria said. "We met by accident. He sat at the wrong table." Emma frowned. "What table?" "At a restaurant. There was a mix-up. He ended up sitting across from me, and we talked for a while." "What did you talk about?" "You, actually, among other things." Emma processed this. "What about me?" "He talked about the crackers," Victoria said, "and the deal about the teeth." Emma turned to look at Logan with an expression of profound betrayal. "Dad." It came up naturally. "You told her about the crackers?" She seemed interested. Emma looked back at Victoria with a reassessment happening visibly in her face. "Do you want to swing?" she said. "The middle one is the fastest." "I'll sit for a bit," Victoria said, "but thank you." Emma nodded, apparently satisfied with this, and turned and went back to the swings. Not the middle one this time, the one closest to the bench, where she could swing and still be part of whatever was happening over here, which was, Logan understood, a very Emma solution. Proximity without commitment. He and Victoria sat without talking for a while. Emma swung. The train went over again. The younger kid's argument about the slide resolved itself, apparently in favor of the smaller one, who went down 3 times in rapid succession with the vindicated intensity of someone who had won something. "She looks like you," Victoria said. "Around the eyes." "People say that. I always think she looks more like Claire, but I might not be objective. The way she assessed me when she walked up, that was you." He looked at Emma on the swing. She was right, actually. He hadn't noticed it before, not consciously, but Emma had that same stillness before she decided something, that same quality of actually looking before she spoke. "Maybe," he said. "She's not afraid of anything. She's afraid of drains, the sound they make when the water goes down. Won't put her feet near them." Victoria glanced at him. "Really?" "Took me 8 months to figure out that was the issue. I thought it was just bath resistance. Turns out it's specific. The drain sound." He drank from his thermos. "I put a cloth over the drain when the water runs out and she's fine. She came up with that solution herself." Victoria looked back at Emma on the swing. She had an expression on her face he hadn't seen before. Something that was almost uncertain, almost soft, like a surface that had been very hard for a very long time, meeting something it didn't know how to be hard against. He didn't say anything. He let it be what it was. Emma drifted over again 20 minutes later, this time sidling up to the bench with the energy of someone who has decided they want to be part of a conversation but doesn't want to admit they're interested. She leaned against the side of the bench next to Logan, close enough to feel his warmth, and looked sideways at Victoria. "Do you have kids?" Emma asked. "No," Victoria said. "Do you want some?" "Emma," Logan said, "it's a normal question. It's a very personal question. You said I should ask if I want to know something instead of guessing." He could not argue with this because he had, in fact, said exactly that. He looked at Victoria with an expression of helpless apology. Victoria's mouth moved in a way that was almost a smile. "I don't know," Victoria said to Emma, answering the actual question. "I haven't thought about it very much." Emma frowned. "How do you not think about it? Kids are everywhere." "I suppose I've been busy with other things." "What things?" "Work, mostly. My dad works a lot too, Emma said, but he still thinks about important things. She said it without accusation, just as a statement of fact. Then, with the lateral logic of a 6-year-old, "Are you going to marry my dad?" The question landed in the middle of the park and sat there. Logan felt something tighten in his chest. Not panic exactly, more like the feeling of standing on a floor that has just shifted slightly, and you're not sure if it's going to keep shifting. He opened his mouth. Victoria spoke first. "Why do you ask that?" she said. Calm, direct. Emma shrugged in the way that meant she wasn't being casual. She was thinking. "Because you're a lady and you know about the crackers." She looked at Victoria seriously. "And you're here. Ladies don't usually come to the park." "I can see your reasoning," Victoria said. "Dad had a girlfriend once. She didn't come to the park." Emma picked at a loose thread on her coat sleeve. "I didn't like her that much. She called me little one. I'm not little. I'm average for my age." "For the record," Logan said to no one in particular. "So are you going to?" Emma asked Victoria again. Patient, persistent. Victoria looked at her for a moment, and Logan could see that she was not going to be condescending about this, was not going to deflect with a smile and a subject change, and that meant she was going to have to say something real. He found he was holding very still, waiting to hear what it was. "I don't know," Victoria said. "That's an honest answer. Your dad and I are still figuring some things out." Emma appeared to accept this. "Okay," she said. "Then, if you did, you'd have to know some things." "What things?" Emma held up one finger. "He always keeps his promises." She said it with the certainty of someone stating a law of physics. Even the bad ones. Like once he promised we could get ice cream, and then I had a stomach ache so we couldn't, and he was sad about it for 3 days. "He kept the sad part of the promise," Victoria said. "Yeah." Emma held up a second finger. "He makes the world's best pancakes. Not regular, the crispy edge ones. I've heard about those." Emma looked at Logan. "You told her about the pancakes too?" "That one didn't come up. She's deduced it from context." Emma accepted this and held up a third finger. "And he loves me more than anything, even the truck." A pause. "I'm allowed to say that because he told me." "He told me something similar," Victoria said. "On the phone, the night we met." Emma looked at her sharply. "You were there when he called me?" "I heard part of it, from across a restaurant." "Which part?" "The part about loving you more than pizza." Emma stared at her for a second, then looked at Logan with an expression of complete betrayal, mixed with deep satisfaction. "She knows about the pizza thing." "She does." "Dad." Emma turned back to Victoria with the air of someone accepting an unexpected situation. "Okay, you can know that." A pause. "What's your favorite food?" "I'm not sure I have one." Emma frowned. "How do you not have a favorite food?" "I eat what's in front of me mostly. I don't think about it much." Emma stared at her with the focused concern of someone identifying a problem. "That's sad," she said without cruelty. "You should have a favorite food. It's important." She deliberated for a moment. "Have you had the crispy edge pancakes?" "Not yet." Emma looked at Logan. The look said several things simultaneously, in the way that Emma's look sometimes compressed entire arguments into a single expression. It said, "She hasn't had the pancakes." It said, "This is a solvable problem." It said, "Why are you just sitting there?" "Dad makes them on Sunday mornings," Emma said, turning back to Victoria. "They're better than anything." "Emma," Logan said, "I'm just saying." She looked at him with complete innocence and the complete absence of innocence that only a 6-year-old could manage simultaneously. "She said she doesn't have a favorite food. That's a problem. We can fix it." Logan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Logan. There was, in that look, something that neither of them had put there on purpose, something that had arrived without being planned, the way things do when you stop arranging them. "I should get back to the swings," Emma announced, having apparently resolved the matter to her satisfaction. She pushed off the bench and trotted back toward the swing set, her sneakers flickering light with each step, her red coat impossibly bright against the gray November park. Logan watched her go. Then he looked at Victoria, who was watching Emma with that expression, the one he'd been seeing more of over the past 20 minutes, the one he didn't have a clean word for. Something in her face that was working hard not to move. "She's something," Victoria said, quietly. "Yeah. You told me. But you can't." She stopped. "Hearing about someone and being in front of them are different things." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, not less controlled exactly. More like control was requiring more effort. She said, "You always keep your promises, even the sad ones." "She has a way of getting to the center of things. She gets that from you." He didn't answer that. He looked at Emma on the swing, the red hood down, the hair loose and impractical, the sneakers lighting up with each arc. The thing he'd been carrying around all week. The weight of the decision, the legal pad in the junk drawer, the image of Claire in the hospital room, the number 50 million in his head making everything else feel slightly unreal, was still there. But it felt different here, in the cold November park with the train going over the tracks and Emma pumping the swing. Less abstract, more human-sized. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes?" "The first night, in the restaurant, when I said I should go, you didn't let me." Victoria looked at him. "You said, 'Do you want to?' which is different from 'please stay,' but you also didn't just let me leave." He turned to look at her. "Why?" She was quiet for a long moment. The train went over again, that low vibration in the bench, and was gone. "Because you'd just been on the phone with her," she said, "and the way you talked." She stopped. "I've been in a lot of meetings. I've sat across from a lot of people. I've watched people talk about the things that matter to them." She turned her cup in her hands. "Most of the time you can see the gap between the thing they're saying matters and the thing that actually does. The gap is small sometimes it's large, but it's usually there." She looked at the swing set. "There was no gap. The way you talked about her, the deal about the teeth, it was just all the way true. I don't see that very often." A pause. "I wanted to sit across from it a little longer, that's all." Logan said nothing. "I know that sounds..." "No," he said. "It doesn't sound like anything strange." Emma came back off the swings 20 minutes later, not because she was done, but because she'd spotted that the small kids had vacated the climbing structure and she wanted it. She swung past the bench at a run and called, "I'm doing the ship," without stopping. Logan held up a hand to indicate he'd heard and turned back to watch. He and Victoria sat in the particular comfortable quiet of two people who have run out of careful things to say and are into the territory of just being somewhere together. He wasn't entirely sure when that had happened. After a while, Victoria said, "I've been thinking about what you said. On the bench by the river." "Which part?" "That Emma's who you answer to." She was looking at the climbing structure, where Emma was negotiating the upper deck with the focused intensity she brought to everything. "I've been trying to think about who I answer to, and I don't have an answer." She said it plainly, without self-pity, which somehow made it harder to hear. "The company, the board, the terms of the governance structure, my grandfather's logic from 40 years ago." A pause. "None of those are a person." "No," he said, "they're not. Your daughter walked up to me with no agenda. She asked me if I was going to marry her father, and she meant it as a real question, not a provocation. She told me I should have a favorite food." Victoria's voice was very quiet now. "When did I stop thinking about what my favorite food is?" He didn't try to answer that. "The contract," she said. "The 50 million. I built the whole thing around..." She stopped again, looked down at her hands. "I built it around the assumption that everything has a price that makes it rational, that if you set the number right, the logic takes care of the rest." She looked up at the climbing structure where Emma was now sitting on the top deck, looking out at the park with the satisfied expression of someone who has claimed a territory. "She asked me if I wanted kids, and I said I don't know. The real answer is I haven't let myself think about it because thinking about it has always felt like thinking about something I wasn't allowed to want." Logan looked at her. "Who told you that?" "Nobody said it in those words?" A pause. "Nobody had to." Emma's voice carried across the park. "Dad, I'm the captain." She was standing now on the top of the climbing structure, which was higher than Logan was comfortable with, waving one arm. "I see you," he called back, Also get down from the very top of that. I'm fine. Emma. She descended one level with great theatrical reluctance and waved again from there. Victoria was watching her with something on her face that had moved past the guarded threshold entirely, that was just open, raw at the edge, like someone standing at a window they've kept shut for a long time and finally feeling the air come through. Logan looked at that expression for a moment, then looked away, because it felt like the kind of thing you shouldn't stare at. I'm still not signing the contract, he said. I know. That hasn't changed. I know. A pause. Logan, he looked at her. Can I come Sunday for the pancakes? She said it in a way that cost something. He could hear that. The asking of it, the being in the position of asking. Not as a proposal, not as anything, just... She stopped. Just as a person, he said. Yes. He thought about it honestly, which meant he thought about Emma, which meant he thought about what Sunday morning meant. The kitchen with the 2 burners that didn't heat evenly, the cartoon dog calendar, Emma at the counter in her pajamas making authoritative statements about the proper amount of butter, the particular domestic texture of the only world that actually mattered to him. The thing was, he had watched Victoria Sinclair sit in a public park in Queens and be talked at by a 6-year-old about pancakes and promises and the importance of having a favorite food. And she had not deflected, had not performed, had not managed it from a distance. She had sat with it. She had let it land on her. And something about that, the not managing of it, the being actually present for it, had told him something his gut had been waiting to hear. 8:30, he said. She's up at 7 and incoherent until 8. Don't be early. Victoria nodded. Something moved through her face that was too quick for him to catch. And then she had her composure back. Mostly, the way you might smooth a coat after it's been ruffled. 8:30. And bring something. She'll be offended if you show up empty-handed. It doesn't matter what. Orange juice. Anything. I can do that. Emma appeared at his elbow from nowhere, as she often did, with wood chips in her hair and her coat half-zipped. I'm hungry, she announced. We just had lunch 2 hours ago. Being captain is exercise. He looked at her. She looked back with the particular expression of someone who knows they've made a compelling point. He looked at Victoria, who had the beginning of the thing on her face again. The almost smile, contained, like something that knew it was supposed to stay small but was having trouble. Hot chocolate? He said. There's a place on Queens Boulevard that does it properly. Emma's eyes went wide with a speed that would have been funny if it wasn't so predictable. Yes. Victoria. He looked at her. She stood up from the bench, brushing off her coat, and there was something different about the way she stood, some small loosening in it. I've never had hot chocolate in Queens, she said. That's a problem we can fix, Emma said, taking her hand without any ceremony whatsoever, as if this were the most natural thing in the world, and began pulling her toward the park gate. Logan watched for a half-second, Victoria startled, then not startled, letting herself be pulled, looking down at the small, red-coated person dragging her purposefully toward hot chocolate on Queens Boulevard, and something moved through his chest that he didn't try to name. Not the decision itself. Not the answer to the question that had been sitting on his kitchen table for 2 weeks, but the thing underneath it, the thing that all the arguments and the legal pads and the dollar amounts had been arranged around without ever quite touching. He picked up his thermos and followed them out of the park. That evening, after Victoria had gone back to Manhattan and Emma was in the bath performing an elaborate drama involving 3 rubber animals and a serious territorial dispute, Logan sat at the kitchen table. He opened the junk drawer. He found the folded legal pad page with the 2 columns. He opened it and looked at what he'd written. The for column, the against column, Claire. She'd know something was off. I'd know. He read it for a long time. Then he folded it back up, not in the junk drawer this time, but in his jacket pocket, close. He hadn't made the decision yet. But he knew something now that he hadn't known before he'd watched his daughter take a billionaire's hand in a park in Queens without a second thought, the way Emma took most things, completely, without reservation, as if the world were still largely trustworthy, because no one had taken that from her yet. He wasn't going to be the one who did. The pancakes happened on Sunday. Victoria arrived at 8:28, which told Logan she'd been outside for a few minutes waiting for the right moment, which he found both endearing and very her. She had orange juice, A large container of it, the expensive kind with the pulp still in, not from concentrate. And she stood in the doorway of the apartment in jeans and a plain sweater, looking slightly uncertain in the way that people who are almost never uncertain look when they are, which is to say, very. Emma was at the counter in her pajamas, which had small foxes on them, and she turned around when Logan opened the door and said with complete authority, "You came." "I said I would," Victoria said. "Dad said you might not." Logan, who had said no such thing, pointed his spatula at Emma. "I said she might be busy. That's different." Emma assessed this distinction and found it unpersuasive. She turned back to the bowl in front of her, where she had been tasked with mixing the dry ingredients, a job she performed with excessive thoroughness. "You can sit there," she said, gesturing toward one of the two stools at the counter without looking up. "But don't touch the bowl until I say." Victoria sat. She put the orange juice on the counter. "What are you mixing?" "The dry part. Dad does the wet part and then we put them together. If you mix them too early, it gets tough." She looked up briefly with the gravity of someone transmitting important knowledge. "Gluten." "I didn't know that," Victoria said. "Most people don't." Logan poured batter and did not say anything about where Emma had learned about gluten, which was from a cooking show she'd watched approximately once and had been citing ever since as if she'd attended culinary school. He got the pan going on the better burner, the front left, which ran slightly hot, requiring adjustment, and listened to Emma explain to Victoria the entire theoretical framework of pancake construction, including the resting period for the batter, the importance of the butter temperature, and her personal position on blueberries, which were acceptable but not necessary. "What about chocolate chips?" Victoria asked. Emma stopped mixing. She looked at Logan. She looked back at Victoria. "That's a dessert pancake," she said. "We don't do dessert pancakes for breakfast." "Why not?" "Because then what do you have for dessert?" Victoria appeared to genuinely consider this. "That's a reasonable problem." "I know." Emma went back to mixing. "Dad says I think about dessert too much, but I think about it the right amount." The apartment was small. This had always been true, would continue to be true regardless of how many conversations about $50 million Logan had in parks and on benches overlooking rivers. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that opened to a living room with a couch that had survived 3 apartments and was starting to look like it. The kind of place that accumulates the texture of actual living. Emma's artwork on the refrigerator door, the cartoon dog calendar, a pile of library books on the coffee table, Logan's work boots by the door with dried mud on the left one that he kept forgetting to deal with, a small folded paper crane on the windowsill that Emma had made in school and placed there because, she had explained, it was watching the street. Victoria did not comment on any of this. She didn't make the sounds people sometimes made in places like this. The compensatory sounds that were meant to be warm but landed as commentary. She just sat at the counter and watched Emma mix dry ingredients and asked questions and answered Emma's questions back. And it was, Logan thought, while watching the butter melt at the edge of the pan, about as natural as anything he could have expected, which surprised him and didn't surprise him at the same time. He made the pancakes, the crispy edge ones, which required more butter than was strictly defensible, and a pan temperature that was slightly too high, and a willingness to watch them closely. Emma narrated. Victoria listened. The orange juice got opened and poured into mismatched glasses. The good one for Victoria, the one with the faded cartoon duck for Emma, the cracked one that was still structurally fine for Logan. And they ate at the small kitchen table with Emma between them, which had not been planned but was where Emma put herself because she wanted to be close to both things at once. "These are the best pancakes," Victoria said. "I know," Emma said. "I told you." "You did." "Do you have a favorite food yet?" Victoria looked at the pancake on her fork. "I might be developing one." Emma looked satisfied in the specific way she looked when she'd been right about something she'd known she was right about all along. She ate 3 pancakes and drank all her juice and asked Victoria 7 more questions, ranging from whether she had a dog, no, whether she'd ever been to Disney World, no, which Emma received as information that required processing, and whether she thought the paper crane on the windowsill could actually see things. "Emma," Logan said, "it's a philosophical question. It's a yes or no question about whether a piece of paper has eyes. Philosophy is usually yes or no questions. She looked at Victoria expectantly. Victoria looked at the paper crane on the windowsill. She was quiet for a second, actually thinking about it, which was the right response. "I think it sees what we put in front of it," she said, "which means it sees whatever's most important in the room." Emma stared at her. Then she looked at the crane. Then she looked at her pancakes. "Okay," she said, in the tone of someone filing something away. After breakfast, Emma was excused to her room to get dressed, which would take the previously established 40 minutes. Logan poured more coffee and Victoria stayed at the table, which she didn't have to do and did anyway. He sat back down across from her. The apartment was quiet in the way it got when Emma wasn't actively in the middle of it. A different kind of quiet, lower pressure. "I'm not going to sign it," he said. "I want to give you a real answer instead of making you wait out the rest of the week." Victoria nodded once. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look anything for a second, and then something moved through her face that was complicated and quick, and he couldn't catch all of it. "I understand," she said. "It's not the money, you know that." "I know. If it were just me, I might—" He stopped. "I don't know what I'd do if it were just me." That's an honest answer, but Emma's not a hypothetical I can bracket out of the decision. She's the whole thing. "I know that too." Victoria looked at the crane on the windowsill. "Logan, I need to tell you something." He waited. "Last night I was reviewing the contract again, the terms, the exit clauses, the timeline for filing." She paused, and I realized I couldn't do it. He looked at her. "The contract. The whole strategy. The arranged marriage structure, the governance play, She stopped and started differently. "I've been building the argument in my head that this is about protecting the company. The hospitals, the housing fund, the people in Ohio, and those things are real. Those stakes are real." She looked at the table. "But I've also been using them as a reason not to look at what I'm actually doing." She looked up at him. "I was going to put a man and his child inside a fake life for 2 years because it was the most efficient mechanism I could find for solving my problem. And I was going to pay for it because I've always been able to pay for the things I wanted, and that's been enough." A pause. "Until it wasn't." Logan said nothing. "Emma asked me if I was going to marry her father," Victoria said. "And then she told me the things that matter about you, the promises, the pancakes, the love that's bigger than the truck." She said it quietly. She was telling me what real looks like. She didn't know she was. She was just being honest in the way children are when nobody's taught them yet to be otherwise. She looked at her coffee cup. "I've spent a lot of years learning to be otherwise." "Victoria, I'm tearing up the contract," she said. "I made that decision last night. I came this morning because I said I would, and I wanted to—" She stopped. "I wanted to be here because I wanted to be here, not because of any of the other things." She looked at him directly. "I thought you should know that before you gave me your answer." Logan sat with that for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, the street was doing its Saturday morning thing. A delivery truck idling, a woman walking a dog that was too big for the sidewalk, someone's music 2 floors up, muffled. "What happens to the company?" he said. "The board moves to install Richard's committee within 90 days. She said it without flinching. "I'll challenge what I can legally challenge. There are avenues. It might slow the timeline. It won't change the outcome." A beat. "Unless I can build a viable counter-strategy in the meantime, which is possible. Difficult, but possible. The board isn't monolithic. There are members who are not Richard's people. If I can—" She stopped herself. "That's a problem for next week." "You're not scared?" She thought about this honestly. "I'm terrified," she said. "I've spent my entire adult life managing that company. It's the structure my whole life is built inside. Without it, I don't know—" She stopped again. "I don't know what I am. Outside of it." "You're someone who knows about gluten," he said. She looked at him. "And someone who has never had hot chocolate in Queens. And someone who thinks a paper crane sees what's most important in the room." He held her gaze. "That's not nothing." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. The complicated thing moved through her face again, slower this time. From the other room came the sound of Emma opening her closet, which sounded like a small avalanche because it always did. And then a pause, and then Emma's voice. "Dad, where's my green shirt? Laundry basket, clean pile." A longer pause. There are two clean piles. The shorter one. A moment, then. Found it. Victoria looked in the direction of Emma's room, and her expression was the open one again, the one from the park, the one that happened when she stopped managing things for a minute. Logan watched it, carefully, and without making it into anything more than what it was. "Come on," he said, and stood up with his coffee. "She's going to be dressed in 30 minutes instead of 40, and she'll want to show you the crane up close." He was right. Emma emerged in 12 minutes, green shirt, jeans, her hair in a ponytail that was going to fall out by noon, holding the paper crane with the seriousness of a curator presenting a significant artifact. Victoria spent 20 minutes being shown the crane, Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, the library books on the coffee table, 3 of which Emma provided brief synopses of, including her critical assessments, which were specific and occasionally harsh, and the view from the window of the building across the street, which Emma maintained was interesting because you could watch the people in the lit windows at night and make up stories about them. "What kind of stories?" Victoria asked. "All kinds. There's a man on the 4th floor who eats dinner alone every night. Dad says he's probably fine, but I'm writing him a friend." She said it with casual certainty. "You're writing him a friend," Victoria repeated. "In my head. In the story. He has a friend now. They meet at the bus stop." Victoria looked at Logan. Logan shrugged in a way that communicated, "This is how she operates, and I've stopped trying to redirect it." "That's generous of you," Victoria said to Emma. Emma looked at her with a slight frown, not offended, evaluating. "It's not generous. It's just what you do. If someone needs something you can give them, you give it." She set the crane back on the windowsill. "Right?" Victoria looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Logan. Then she looked back out the window at the building across the street. "Right," she said, quietly. The morning ended the way good mornings end, gradually, without announcement. Emma wanted to watch her show. Logan cleaned up the kitchen. Victoria helped dry the dishes without being asked, which surprised him enough that he didn't say anything about it. When it was time for her to go, Emma hugged her goodbye with the unceremonious totality that Emma applied to hugs, full contact, no hedging, and Victoria stood in the doorway holding this hug with the look of someone who has just received something they didn't know they were short of. "Will you come back?" Emma asked, pulling back, looking up. "If your dad says it's okay," Victoria said. Emma looked at Logan. "Sure," he said. Emma nodded with the gravity of someone ratifying a treaty. "Okay then." And she went back to the couch and her show, and that was that. Logan walked Victoria down to the street. It was a cold morning, the good crisp kind, not the damp, miserable kind. "The board meeting is Tuesday," she said on the sidewalk. "The one where I'm expected to present the compliance documentation for the succession clause. And you're going to show up without it. I'm going to show up and tell them I won't be filing it and explain my position." She said it steadily. "It'll go the way it goes." "Do you want—" He stopped. "I don't know what I was going to offer. I fix pipes." "You do other things too," she said, not with any particular emphasis, just as a fact. He looked at her for a moment. "Call me. After. If you want." She nodded. Hayes. Sinclair. She walked to the corner and flagged a cab. Didn't have a car waiting, he noticed, which was either a choice or a sign that the accoutrements of the life were already starting to loosen, and got in, and the cab went uptown, and Logan stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a moment before going back upstairs. Emma was on the couch. "She's nice," she said, without looking away from her show. "Yeah," he said. "Different, though." "How do you mean?" Emma thought about it. Like she forgot how to just be somewhere. She keeps remembering in the middle. Logan sat down next to her. He thought about that. He thought about a woman in a park who looked at a 6-year-old like she was receiving instructions in a language she'd been trying to learn for years. He thought about dishes being dried without being asked. He thought about, "I don't know what I am outside of it." "She's figuring it out," he said. Emma leaned against him without taking her eyes off the screen. "Yeah," she said. "We can help with that." He didn't say anything. He put his arm around her. The show did its show things. The board meeting happened on Tuesday. Logan didn't know the details until Thursday when Victoria called. He was on a job in Astoria, a restaurant kitchen with a grease trap that hadn't been serviced in what appeared to be several presidential administrations. He took the call outside on the sidewalk, gloves off despite the cold. Her voice on the phone was controlled the way it had been in the coffee shop on 48th, but with the vibration underneath it. It went the way it was going to go, she said. Tell me. She told him. She had arrived with her attorney and without the compliance documentation. She had presented a formal statement to the board declining to proceed with the succession clause strategy and citing her position that the clause itself was an archaic governance mechanism that the company had a fiduciary obligation to revisit. She had been calm. She had been prepared. Richard had let her finish speaking with the patience of someone who had been waiting a very long time for a moment and had no intention of rushing it. The vote had taken 11 minutes. They removed the CEO designation, she said, effective immediately, pending the formal transition protocol. Richard's committee assumes interim executive authority within 60 days. A pause. My father voted with them. Logan was quiet. He called me afterward, she said. He said he was sorry. He said he thought Richard would be more reasonable than... She stopped. He's been saying that about Richard for 30 years. He always thinks people will be more reasonable than they are. He's a good man who is very bad at seeing clearly. Her voice was flat in a way that wasn't flatness. It was the sound of something that had hurt too much to stay as hurt and had compressed into something harder. I told him I understood. I don't entirely, but I said it. Victoria. I'm fine, she said it quickly. I know that sounds like the thing people say when they're not fine, but I mean it differently. I walked out of that room and I felt... She stopped again. This time, the pause was longer. I felt lighter, which doesn't make sense. I just lost the thing I've been building my whole adult life around protecting. It makes sense, he said. It shouldn't. It does, though. You put something down that was very heavy, even if it was yours, even if you wanted to keep carrying it. Putting it down is lighter. She was quiet for a moment. The street in Astoria went about its business around him. A delivery bike, a woman in a coat that was too thin for the weather, a bodega cat watching all of it from a window. I don't know where to go, Victoria said, and it wasn't a figure of speech. He could hear that. The specific quality of someone who has just discovered that the map they've been using their whole life doesn't cover the territory they're standing in. He thought about it for a moment, about what the right thing was, about what was appropriate and what was overstepping and where those lines were. He decided he didn't care that much about the lines. Come to Queens, he said. A pause. Logan, not for any reason. Emma's at school until 3. You can sit in a quiet apartment and drink coffee and not have to be anywhere for a few hours. He looked up at the building he was working in. I'll be done by 2. I'll be home by 2:30. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He said it the same way she had said it to him, in the restaurant, all those weeks ago, when she'd offered to walk him out and he'd told her she didn't have to. I know. I want to. Do you need the address? She already had the address, it turned out. She was there when he got home at 2:20, sitting on the front stoop of his building in her coat, not on her phone, not doing anything, just sitting, watching the street. He'd never seen her doing nothing before. It looked strange on her and also like something she needed practice at and was maybe just starting to practice. You didn't have to sit on the stoop, he said. Your neighbor let me in, but I didn't want to wait in the hall. It felt odd. It's New York. Waiting in halls is fine. I prefer the stoop. He unlocked the building door and held it. She went in. Upstairs, he made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table, the same place she'd sat on Sunday, the same mismatched chair, and put her coat over the back and sat with her hands around the mug when it arrived and looked at the cartoon dog calendar on the wall. She circled Sunday, Victoria said, before I came. He looked. Emma had, in fact, drawn a circle around last Sunday in red crayon and written in her careful block letters, V comes for pancakes. Below that, a drawing that was either a pancake or the sun. It was hard to say. I didn't tell her to do that, he said. I know. She looked at the calendar for a long moment. Logan, I need to tell you something else. He sat down across from her. The night after the park, after Emma took my hand and we got hot chocolate, I went home and I sat in my apartment, which is on the 34th floor, and has a view that I've always considered a professional accomplishment, and I felt very clearly like I was in the wrong place. She looked at the mug. Not the apartment specifically, the life, the version of it I'd been building, the whole structure of it. She looked up. Emma said anyone who wants to be part of your family has to understand certain things. The promises, the pancakes, the love. A pause. I've been thinking about what it would mean to be part of something like that, what it would ask of you, and I realized that what it asks is exactly the thing I've spent my entire life avoiding. Which is what? He said. Being real. She said it simply. Letting something be real. Not managed, not structured, not arranged to produce the optimal outcome, just, she stopped. Real. He looked at her across the kitchen table. The afternoon light was coming through the window at the angle it came at in November. Low and pale, the kind that makes everything look like it's being seen clearly for the first time. She looked tired. She looked for the first time since the restaurant, like she wasn't performing anything. No composure doing work. No control held carefully in place. Just a woman sitting at a kitchen table who had lost the thing she'd spent her life building and didn't know yet who she was without it. You know what Emma does when she doesn't know what comes next? He said. What? She sits at that table and she asks me to sit next to her. She doesn't ask for answers, she just doesn't want to be alone in not knowing. He looked at the calendar. That's all she ever really asks for. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Something crossed her face that was completely unguarded and stayed there instead of passing. I don't know how to ask for that, she said. I know. He stood up and refilled both their mugs. You'll figure it out. They sat at the table while the afternoon turned over, and the light shifted, and somewhere in the building a pipe made its settling sound, the low harmonic of metal adjusting to temperature change. The kind of sound most people don't hear anymore because they've stopped listening for the structure underneath things. Logan heard it. He always did. At 10 to 3, he left to get Emma from school. He asked Victoria if she wanted to come, and she said yes, and they walked together to the school 6 blocks away, not talking much, just walking in the cold with their collars up. And when Emma came out the school doors and saw them standing there together, she didn't run or shout or perform any particular reaction. She just walked up, looked at Victoria with the direct assessment she'd inherited from her father, said, "You're still here," with satisfaction, and took both their hands, one on each side, and said she wanted to show Victoria the bakery on Skillman that did the good bread and could they go. They went. The bread was, as advertised, good. Emma ate a roll while they walked back and explained to Victoria the entire structural and sensory difference between good bread and mediocre bread with the confidence of a food critic who has spent time in the field. Victoria asked questions, real ones. Not the questions adults ask children to be encouraging, but the questions of someone who is genuinely interested in what this particular person has to say. Logan walked slightly behind them, watching, hands in his pockets. The evening happened the way evenings happen when they're not being planned, organically, accreting detail by detail. Emma asked if Victoria could stay for dinner and looked at Logan, and Logan said it was up to Victoria, and Victoria said yes. He made pasta, nothing complicated, the kind that comes together in 20 minutes while Emma did her homework at the table and narrated the questions on the worksheet at a volume designed to attract assistance without technically asking for it. Victoria helped with the homework, specifically with a math problem about fractions that Emma had declared impossible, which Victoria approached with a directness that Emma immediately responded to. No softening, no let's try this together energy, just the actual problem and the actual method and a pencil working through the steps. Oh, Emma said when she got it. That's just division. Most math is just division, Victoria said. That seems wrong. Verify it yourself over the next few years. Emma looked at her with the expression she reserved for things she was going to think about for a long time and went back to her worksheet. Dinner. Emma's monologue about Priya's hamster, still named Biscuit, the situation still developing. The dishes. Emma's bath, conducted by Logan, while Victoria sat in the living room with the library books, and the crane on the windowsill. And Logan could hear her moving around in there, not restlessly, just existing in a space. The particular sound of a person learning how to just be somewhere. He came out when Emma was in bed, teeth brushed, lights low, a compromise negotiated. Victoria was on the couch with one of the library books open in her lap. She looked up. "She down?" she said. "Almost." He sat in the chair across the couch. "She wants to know if you'll come to her class thing next Thursday." Victoria went very still. "What class thing?" "Show and tell." "But it's evolved. Now it's show and tell and introduce someone interesting in your life." He looked at her steadily. She apparently told her teacher this week that she knew someone very interesting. Victoria looked at the book in her lap. That was presumptuous of her. "Yeah, that's Emma." A pause. "What would I—" "Talk about what you do, what you know. She just wants you there." He paused. "You don't have to." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. The apartment around them was its quiet evening self. The hum of the refrigerator, the street sounds coming up from below, the paper crane on the windowsill receiving whatever it received. "I don't have a job anymore," she said. "Technically." "I know. I'm a former CEO of a company I no longer run." She said it like she was getting used to the sound of it. "That's what I'd be introducing myself as." Or, Logan said, "You could be the person who knows about gluten and thinks paper cranes see what matters most and has been developing a favorite food." She looked at him. "That's somebody," he said. "That's a real somebody." He looked at the crane. "Emma thinks so." The silence that followed was the good kind, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Victoria looked at the book in her lap, and then at the window, and then at the crane, and her face in the lamplight was tired and open and more real than he'd seen it. The whole run of weeks since the wrong table and the host who'd assumed, since the coffee shop and the bench by the river and the park with the train tracks, and this kitchen table that had accumulated them both without any particular plan. "Okay," she said, finally, quietly. "Tell her okay." He didn't say anything. He picked up the remote and turned the television on low. Nothing specific, just the sound of the world being generally present. And they sat in the living room of a small apartment in Queens, while Emma slept in the next room with her fox pajamas and her fractions and her ideas about what families were supposed to look like. And outside the building, the city did what the city did, relentless and indifferent and full of people living in the spaces between the things they'd planned. On the windowsill, the paper crane sat in the lamplight, watching whatever it watched, seeing whatever it saw. The show and tell happened on a Thursday. Victoria showed up at Emma's school at 1:15 in jeans and a dark sweater. No briefcase, no prepared remarks, nothing that looked like a presentation. Logan was already there, standing in the hallway outside the classroom with the other parents who'd been invited, a loose cluster of people in coats holding coffee cups and looking at the hand-drawn decorations on the bulletin boards with the mild, pleasant expression of adults doing their best in an elementary school hallway. He saw her come through the main doors, and something in him settled, the way it did now when she arrived somewhere she said she'd be. She had been doing that consistently over the past 2 weeks, showing up when she said she would, in the way she'd said she would, without the need to make an entrance or manage how it landed. He didn't think she noticed she was doing it. That was probably why it worked. "How does this go?" she asked when she reached him. They introduce their person. You say a few things about yourself. Kids ask questions. Questions from 7-year-olds are unpredictable. How unpredictable? Last month, a kid asked the guest's parent whether they'd ever seen a dead body. Parent was a nurse, so it got complicated. Victoria looked at the classroom door. That's a wide range of possibility. Emma's questions will be the most pointed, just so you're prepared. I've had Senate briefings. You've never had Emma. She looked at him, almost the smile. Fair. The classroom was the organized chaos of 22 second graders arranged in a semicircle of small chairs with their guest bringers standing at the back. Emma was in the front row, because of course she was, in the green shirt, sitting with her hands folded with a formality that Logan recognized as her serious mode, the mode she deployed for things she'd decided mattered. When the teacher called her name, Emma stood up with the posture of someone about to say something important. "This is Victoria," she said to the class, gesturing to where Victoria had come to stand beside her. She used to run a company that had a lot of money and people in it. She's very smart and she knows things about fractions. A pause. She also doesn't have a favorite food, but she's working on it. I think it might be pancakes. The class absorbed this. Also, Emma added, she's my friend. She said it without looking at Victoria. Just stated it, the way she stated things that were simply true and didn't require ornamentation. Logan, at the back of the room, looked at the floor for a second. Victoria stood very still for a moment. Then she crouched down slightly so she was closer to the level of 22 second graders and said, "Hi." Emma's mostly right, about all of it. The questions that followed were, as promised, unpredictable. How much money did she have? Did she have a mansion? Did she know anyone famous? Why didn't she have a favorite food? That was weird. One kid asked if she was Emma's mom, and Emma said, "No, she's my friend. Those are different things," with a specificity that made the teacher cover her mouth for a second. Then a small boy in the back with thick glasses asked, "If you used to have a big job and now you don't, are you sad?" The room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when a child accidentally asks the exact right thing. Victoria looked at him for a moment. "Sometimes," she said. "But mostly I think I was confused for a long time about what was actually important. And being confused is uncomfortable. Finding out the truth is better, even when it's hard." The boy nodded like this confirmed something he'd suspected. Emma looked satisfied. After, in the hallway, while the kids went to lunch and the parents filed out with the slightly dazed look of people returning from another dimension, Emma found Logan and Victoria and stood between them and said, "You did good," to Victoria, with the authority of someone delivering a professional assessment. "Thank you," Victoria said. "The fraction thing landed well. Marcus is terrible at fractions. I noticed. He might ask you for help sometime." "I'm available," Victoria said, and she meant it. Logan could hear that, and he thought about what that meant, that she was available, that her calendar, which had once been packed with board meetings and governance reviews and the machinery of an empire, was now open in a way that was sometimes hard for her and sometimes, he thought, something else, something she was still figuring out how to name. The figuring out had been the texture of the past 3 weeks. After the board meeting, after the transition protocol was initiated, and Richard Sinclair's committee began the procedural work of assuming interim authority, Victoria's days had reorganized themselves around an absence. The structures that had held her life in shape, the 7 a.m. calls, the afternoon board sessions, the evening events in rooms where everyone was performing something for everyone else. Those were gone, and what remained was unstructured time, which turned out to be a different kind of hard than the structured kind. She had told Logan this one afternoon in the second week, sitting at his kitchen table while Emma was at school and he had come home between jobs to eat lunch, standing at the counter with a sandwich because he didn't sit down for lunch if he had somewhere to be in an hour. "I keep reaching for the schedule," she said. "I pick up my phone and there's nothing there that needs to happen and I don't know what to do with my hands." "What do you do?" "Walk, mostly. I've been walking a lot." "Where?" She looked at the table. "Here, usually. In this direction." He looked at her over the sandwich. "I know," she said. "I know It's fine," he said. "Walk here if you want to walk here." He paused. "But you should also think about what comes next. For you, professionally. Not because of me. Because you're a person who needs something to do with what you're good at." "I'm not sure what I'm good at anymore. Outside of the context I was good at it in. You're good at seeing how things fit together. The fractions thing with Marcus, that was... You saw where the logic broke down in 30 seconds. That's the same skill." She looked at him. "I'm just saying it travels," he said. "Whatever it is you actually know how to do, it travels with you." She had sat with that for a while. He hadn't pushed it further. He'd learned that about her over the weeks, that she processed things deeply and slowly, that she came back to conversations days later with the part she'd actually taken away from them, that the things that mattered to her had to work their way up from somewhere before she could say them out loud. The something to do with what she was good at had started in a modest and tentative way in the 3rd week. A former colleague, one of the board members who had not been Richard's person, a woman named Diane Kowalski, who ran the company's philanthropic foundation, and had, in Logan's assessment of the situation, been the only person in that boardroom who'd looked genuinely troubled by what happened, had called Victoria to talk. The call had been an hour long. Then there had been another call with two other people. Then a meeting Logan didn't ask too many questions about. He knew the shape of it without the details. Victoria was not done. She was figuring out the next form the fight would take. She was doing it carefully, without the artificial deadline of a succession clause pressing on her, without the desperation that had produced a $50 million proposal to a stranger at the wrong table. She was doing it as herself, which was, he had come to understand, something she was still learning how to be. It was slow. It was imperfect. Some mornings she came to the apartment looking like someone who hadn't slept enough and didn't want to be asked about it, and he didn't ask about it. He just made coffee and let her be in the kitchen while Emma narrated the morning. Some days she was sharp and present, and had clearly been thinking hard about something and wanted to talk through it. And those were different days, days with more energy in them, the specific energy of a person who has found the thread again and is following it. She wasn't fixed. He wasn't fixing her. He didn't think that was the right frame, actually. The fixing frame, the saving frame, the idea that one person rebuilds another, and that's the story. He'd seen enough things fall apart and come back together in his work to know that structures don't get rebuilt by one force acting on them from outside. They come back together from the inside, one component finding its proper place, then another, the whole thing remembering what it was supposed to do. What he could offer was the inside of an ordinary life. The kitchen table, the mornings with Emma, the evenings with bad television and library books and the crane on the windowsill, and a 6, now almost 7-year-old who had decided, without making a production of it, that Victoria was part of things. That was what he had. He gave it without conditions and without agenda, the way he'd learned from Claire, who had been better at that than anyone he'd known. Claire, who had walked into a room and given it her full actual attention, who had not managed her relationships from a safe distance, who had said, be present or be elsewhere, but don't do the thing where you're half in and calling it enough. He thought about Claire a lot those weeks, not with the particular grief of the early years, which had been a different thing, heavier, more disorienting, the kind that made everyday objects look strange. This was something quieter, a kind of ongoing conversation with a person who wasn't there anymore, the mental habit of a life built alongside someone, and the way that habit doesn't stop just because the person does. He thought Claire would have found Victoria interesting, would have asked her pointed questions and not let her deflect, and then made her laugh somehow, because Claire had been able to make almost anyone laugh when she decided to, which she didn't always decide to. He thought Claire would have watched Emma take Victoria's hand in the park and felt the same thing he'd felt. That specific parental pride in your child's instincts, the recognition that the kid you're raising is making choices you couldn't have taught them explicitly. He thought Claire would have said to him, at some point in those weeks, in the direct way she had, you know you're allowed to want things for yourself too, not just for her. She'd said versions of that when she was alive, during the years they were together and the years Emma was small and he kept doing the math of his own desires through the filter of what was best for Emma first, which was sometimes right and sometimes a way of not admitting what he wanted. He knew what he wanted. He was slower about it than Claire had ever been, but he was getting there. The diner on Skillman Avenue had become a thing. It had started with Emma's insistence, 2 weeks after the school visit, that they needed to go to the diner on Skillman because she had been telling Victoria about the pancakes there, distinct from the home pancakes, comparable in their own way, a different category. And Victoria had not yet been, which Emma had decided was an oversight that needed correcting. The diner was small, the kind that had been there for 30 years and wasn't trying to be anything different, with laminated menus and coffee that came in white ceramic mugs and booths with seats repaired with electrical tape that nobody had gotten around to replacing. They'd gone on a Saturday. Emma had ordered the pancakes and explained to Victoria the key differences between the diner version and the home version, which Logan had listened to with the expression of a man who had created something that had developed opinions about itself. Victoria had ordered an omelet and coffee and had sat in the booth with her coat on the hook beside her and no device on the table, and had looked, for the first time in Logan's full observation of her, like someone who was simply in a place without needing the place to be other than what it was. They'd gone back the next Saturday, and the one after that. This particular Saturday, 5 weeks after the board meeting, 8 weeks since the wrong restaurant, a span of time that felt both short and like it had reorganized everything, was cold in the specific way late November got in New York, the kind of cold that meant it and had evidence of winter behind it. They walked to the diner, all three of them, Emma between them with her hood finally up because Logan had negotiated a hat compromise, her mittened hand in his left hand, and then, after half a block, her other mittened hand reaching up and finding Victoria's without any preamble or announcement. Victoria didn't miss a step. They settled into the regular booth, which had become the regular booth, through the accumulation of 3 Saturdays, the kind of regular that builds without you deciding to build it. Emma on the inside against the window, Logan across from her, Victoria beside him, because that was how it had arranged itself the first time, and the arrangement had stuck. The ceramic mugs came. The laminated menus came, even though they already knew what they wanted. Emma had been talking since they left the apartment. Something about the hamster situation, which had developed new complexity involving Priya's hamster biscuit, having what appeared to be a personality conflict with the class fish, which was named Captain Something. Emma had forgotten the last name. And she continued to talk while looking at the menu she also already knew, the monologue flowing around the table with the ease of water finding its natural course. Logan looked at his coffee mug. He looked at Victoria beside him, who was listening to Emma with her chin in her hand, and the expression she had that was not quite a smile, but was the place a smile came from. She had a slight crease at the corner of her eye that appeared when she was genuinely amused, and he'd started to look for it, the way you start to look for certain things once you know they're there. He thought about the bench at Carl Schur's and the Grey River and the thermos she hadn't thought to bring 2 of. He thought about $50 million, which had become, in the week since, something abstract and almost theoretical, a number that had occupied a moment and then passed through it without changing what actually mattered. He didn't want $50 million. He told the truth when he'd said that wasn't the issue. What he'd wanted, what he'd been trying to protect by refusing it, was this: the kitchen table, the cartoon dog calendar, the mornings with Emma, the structure of an ordinary life held together by real things rather than arranged ones. He had that. He'd had it before Victoria Sinclair walked through a restaurant door. He had it still. What had changed was the shape of it. The way shapes change when something new enters the space and the existing things rearrange themselves, not because they were wrong before, but because the new shape turned out to be more complete. Emma, he said, during a pause in the hamster narrative. She looked up from the menu. Victoria and I want to tell you something. Emma put down the menu. She had the look she got when she sensed something important, that specific stillness, the inherited quality of his own attention. She looked at him, then at Victoria, then back at him. We've been talking, Logan said, about how things have been, the last couple of months, the park and the pancakes and the school and the diner. He looked at his coffee mug and then at his daughter. About what we want things to look like going forward, the 3 of us. Okay, Emma said, carefully. Victoria spoke. I'm not going anywhere, she said. That's what we wanted to say. I know that the way I appeared in your life was, she stopped, unusual. And I know that I'm not your mother. I would never say that I was. I know what that word means to you, and it's not mine to take. Her voice was steady, and she was looking at Emma directly, the way she always looked at Emma, as a whole person, not a child to be managed. But I'm here, if you want me here, and I'd like to keep being here. Emma was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window, the gray November street outside, a woman in a puffy coat walking a dog that was also wearing a coat. Emma had things to say about dog coats, Logan knew, but this was not the moment for that. Are you and Dad going to be together? Emma asked. She said it with the directness she'd inherited and couldn't help. Logan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Logan. Something passed between them that was not for the diner or for the Saturday or even really for Emma. It was theirs, the specific private language that had been building between them without being formally acknowledged, the language of people who have spent weeks in each other's actual presence and have stopped pretending they don't know what they're doing. Yes, Logan said. Emma nodded. She picked up her menu again. She studied it for a moment with the expression of someone running internal calculations. Then she put it down. Okay, she said. But I still have my own room. You still have your own room, Logan said, and we still do the pancakes on Sunday. Yes. And Victoria has to get a real favorite food, not just developing one, an actual one. Victoria kept her face composed with visible effort. I'm working on it. Work faster, Emma said, and picked up her menu with the finality of someone who has addressed the relevant items and is ready to move to the next thing. Logan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Logan. This time the smile arrived all the way, complete. The crease at the corner of the eye, the whole thing unheld. The food came. Emma ate her pancakes with systematic dedication and continued the hamster story from roughly where she'd left off, incorporating new detail as it occurred to her, the narrative expanding in the way Emma's narratives always expanded, laterally, enthusiastically, in directions you couldn't have predicted from the beginning. Victoria asked questions, real ones. Logan drank his coffee and listened to both of them and felt something in his chest that was not complicated and not qualified and not arranged, that was just there, the way structural integrity is just there when a thing is built right. Not announced, not performed, simply present and load-bearing. He thought about what Emma had said in the park, that first Saturday, when she'd inventoried the things you had to know if you wanted to be part of their family. The promises. The pancakes. The love. She'd said it like a checklist, like conditions of entry, and at the time he'd felt both proud of her and slightly alarmed, the way you feel when your child is right about something in a way you hadn't taught them. What he understood now, on this Saturday in November, in a diner with repaired booth seats and ceramic mugs, and the smell of coffee and eggs and winter coming through every time the door opened, was that Emma had not been setting conditions. She'd been giving instructions. She'd been telling Victoria, and maybe telling him too, in the way Emma sometimes said things that were for more than one person, what the place was built on, the foundation material, the stuff underneath that you don't see but that everything else sits on. Promises kept even when they cost something. Ordinary mornings taken seriously. Love given without calculation, without a return clause, without a number attached to it that made it rational. That was it. That was the whole thing. It wasn't complicated except for all the ways it was the hardest thing in the world. He thought about the legal pad in the junk drawer. For and against. He hadn't thrown it away. He'd found it a week ago while looking for a battery, still folded, Claire in the against column, I'd know below it. He'd held it for a moment, then put it back in the drawer. Not because it was still relevant to any decision, but because it was a record of a moment when he'd tried to see something clearly, and he had a respect for those moments even when they were imperfect, even when the clarity they produced was incomplete. He'd been incomplete for 4 years. In the specific way you're incomplete when you've lost the person you built your whole interior life alongside. He was still incomplete, in that way. That particular shape of missing Claire was not something that filled in, and he didn't expect it to. Emma had her shape of it too, different, younger, the shape of an absence rather than a presence lost, and that would travel with her in its own way. But incompleteness is not the same as being unfinished. He'd taken a long time to understand that distinction. You can be carrying a permanent absence and still be whole. The two things coexist. They just require you to be honest about it, which was maybe the only thing Claire had ever really asked of him. He was being honest about it now, in a diner on Skillman Avenue on a cold Saturday with his daughter and a woman who had arrived in his life through the most improbable sequence of accidents and had turned out to be exactly the kind of real that was worth staying in the room for. Victoria was telling Emma something about the hamster situation, an unexpected opinion on the personality conflict with the fish, offered with the pragmatic seriousness she brought to everything. And Emma was listening with her head tilted, her fork paused midway, the expression on her face that meant she was genuinely reconsidering her position. It was an expression Logan saw on Emma's face with adults maybe twice a year. Emma did not reconsider positions lightly. He watched the two of them and thought, this is the thing you can't arrange for. You can't put a number on it, or a clause around it, or a timeline to it. You can't build it in a boardroom or buy it with $50 million or inherit it from anyone. You just end up at the wrong table, and you stay, and you're honest, and you show up, and you let what's real be real. And if you're lucky, and luck is real, it exists. It is not guaranteed to anyone. If you're lucky, you find yourself in a diner on a Saturday with the people who are yours, and the coffee is decent, and the pancakes arrive, and your daughter looks at the person across from her and actually changes her mind about something. That's the whole story. Or rather, that's not the whole story, because the story doesn't have a whole. It keeps going. It will keep going past this Saturday and past this winter and into whatever shape next year takes and the year after that. Victoria would find her way back into the work she was built for because she was too good at it and too driven by what she knew to be right to stay away from it. And the fight for the company, the real one, the one about the hospitals and the housing fund and the 800 people in Ohio, was not over. It was reorganizing itself. And Logan would not be in the middle of that fight in any formal way. But he would be on the other end of a phone call when the hard days happened. And he would make coffee. And he would be present, which was what he had and what he was willing to give. Emma would turn 7 in December and had already communicated specific requirements about her birthday, which included, but was not limited to, a hamster named Biscuit II. Logan had not committed to this. He was thinking about it. Victoria had, without saying so explicitly, communicated through several small signs that she thought the hamster was a reasonable idea, which was going to be a complicating factor. The things that were broken would stay somewhat broken, the way things do. Logan's back would need the surgery eventually, and he would keep not scheduling it until he couldn't anymore, which was a flaw in him he recognized and had not corrected. Victoria would have mornings where she woke up and the loss of the company was right there, solid and heavy, and she would carry it around for the day without knowing how to put it down. And those days would be harder than others. Emma would have the shape of her missing mother for the rest of her life, and there would be moments, graduations, ordinary Tuesdays, whenever she had to explain to someone why her family looked the way it looked, where that shape would be vivid and specific and hard. None of that was going away. You don't arrange for the hard parts to go away. You arrange for the company to be worth it when they arrive. Emma set down her fork and reached across the table with the unself-conscious physical ease that was specifically Emma, and fixed a piece of Victoria's hair that had come loose, tucking it back with small, decisive fingers. Victoria went very still for a half-second. Then she didn't. It was doing a thing, Emma explained, and picked up her fork again. "Thank you," Victoria said. Her voice was very steady. Only Logan, sitting next to her, could hear what was in it. He put his hand on the table. Victoria put her hand on the table beside his. Not dramatic, no announcement, just there. Emma, who noticed everything, didn't say anything about it. She was looking out the window at the dog in the coat, who had stopped on the sidewalk to investigate something interesting at the base of a lamppost, and she had the expression she got when she was composing something in her head, some story about the dog or the woman walking it, some narrative she was building in the way she built them, generously, without being asked, giving the people in front of her more life than she'd found them with. The coffee got refilled. The door opened and closed and let winter in and kept it out again. Somewhere in the city, pipes ran under the ground, holding the weight of everything above them, doing their work without being seen, which was what good structure did. Logan thought about the night he'd walked into the wrong restaurant, the glass door and the marble floor, and the lights that cost more to install than he made in a year. He thought about sitting down at the wrong table. He thought about $50 million and park benches and grease traps and paper cranes, and the sound of a train going over elevated tracks on a cold November afternoon. He thought, I didn't know then what I was walking into. Then he thought, yes, you did. Not the specifics, but the thing underneath the specifics. The way a person knows when they're close to something real, not because of how it looks, but because of how it feels when you stop managing the distance and just let it be close. He'd known. He just hadn't had the word for it yet. "Dad," Emma said. She was still looking out the window, the dog now disappearing up the block. "Can we stay a little longer?" He looked at her. He looked at Victoria. He picked up his coffee. "Yeah," he said. "We can stay." Outside, the city moved the way it always moved, relentless and indifferent and full of wrong turns that take you somewhere you never planned to be and couldn't have found if you'd tried. The diner held its warmth against the November cold. Emma leaned against the window and watched the street. Victoria drank her coffee and said nothing and was simply wholly present, which was a thing she was getting better at one ordinary day at a time. And Logan Hayes, who fixed things for a living, sat in a booth with his hand on a table next to the hand of a woman who had walked out of an arranged life into an open one, and his daughter's nose making a small fog circle on the cold diner glass, and thought that some things can't be fixed, can only be built. Slowly, imperfectly, from real material, by people who have decided to stop waiting for the right conditions and start with what they actually have. It's never the table you planned. It's always the one you stayed at,